Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the Cryptoverse. Today, we're going to talk about Bitcoin and we're going to be discussing the Fear and Greed Index. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and check out the sale on Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. Let's go ahead and jump in. So, the Fear and Greed Index comes from this website, and I will link this website down in the description below if you want to go check it out. It basically just provides you an update on what the fear and greed index is at any given time. And right now we can see that the fear and greed index is currently coming in. Let me reload this page here. Is currently coming in at 73, which is sort of ticked up here a little bit over the last few days. So I just wanted to look at that in the context of history to show how useful it has been, how other times it hasn't been as useful, and how we can even make it even more useful. I think the fear and greed index is a great tool to understand just how fearful the market is, how greedy the market is, and so on and so forth. But it can have sometimes unwanted effects if you're not familiar with just how long we can stay in greed or extreme greed, or just how long we can stay in fear or extreme fear. If you look at this chart, or if you look at the raw values, you can see that we are at levels now that are higher than where we were earlier in the year, which also corresponds to a higher price for Bitcoin than where it has been earlier in the year. For a lot of altcoins, they are, they're still around or below their February or April highs. Some of them are well above those April highs. Bitcoin is well above where it was earlier in this year, and so too the fear and greed index is at a higher level today than it was back then, currently at 73. Now, greed and fear, again, as I said earlier, you can stay in fear or greed for a long time before sentiment ultimately reverses course. And so what I wanted to do is just look at the brief data that we have here to show where it topped out based on the last two moves where the fear and greed index went up into this higher range after coming from some pretty low levels. So you have two main examples. You have 2019, and then you also have 2020 and 2021. And in 2019, you can see that it started off all the way down here at around 9, and it then eventually topped out at 95. Okay, so it went from 9 to 95 in the span of about 6 or 7 months or so. Now, in 2019, if you saw the fear and greed index at 95 and you sold, it would have worked out incredibly well, right? If you just said, hey, I'm going to sell my Bitcoin whenever the fear and greed index gets to the 90 to 100 level, it would have worked out very well, because it was basically at 80, 83, 87, and then it went from 87 to 90, 95, and then that was the top, right? So if you had just waited to the 90 to 100 range, it would have worked out very well in 2019. And then, Bitcoin still hung around those highs for months, but it still was just lower highs, right? It was nothing more than lower highs, and those lower highs lasted for about 9 months or so. Lower highs and lower lows until we finally got, the pandemic black swan event that finally sort of reset the entire asset class. Now, let's say you took that same strategy in 2021 and you said, all right, I'm going to sell my Bitcoin when the fear and greed index gets to 90 to 100. Well, had you done that, it would have meant you sold your Bitcoin here on November 20th, which is right around the time that Bitcoin hit about 15.62K. So this shows you that it's not always the best tool in terms of understanding when price action will reverse course, because after the fear and greed index hit 90, Bitcoin still went up, another 4x or so from that level. So it's not always perfect. It's not always just because it goes to say extreme fear or extreme greed. It does not mean that price can't go higher or price can't go lower. I would argue that 2019 was sort of a sort of a your pre-halving year rally that topped out at a lower high, right? At a lower high as opposed to an all-time high. And back then we also had an inverted yield curve like we had today. We had actually right when Bitcoin topped here, just after that was right when the Fed started cutting rates. In fact, right? So Bitcoin topped, and then the Fed started cutting rates because of what was going on in the economy back then, and you can see that back over there, right, selling Bitcoin at a fear and greed index of, if you waited until 90 to 100, it would have worked out great. But had you done so in 2021, you would have missed out on another 4x move. So some of the differences between the 2019 rally and the 2021 rally. So 2019 was a pre-halving year, and we were not in the same type of easing, quantitative easing that we were in back in 2021, right? So the Fed printed a lot of money, trillions of dollars in 2020. and Bitcoin went on a very spectacular bull run. The 2019 bull run, while it was impressive and Bitcoin went up 3 to 4x in that year, it still resulted in a lower high, and we got the uninversion of the yield curve. Had to deal with the sort of the fallout of that over the next 9 months or so until the money printing returned, and then we had enough juice to go to all-time highs. So we look at it today, and again, the fear and greed index is at 73, and there's no guarantee as to how high this is going to go. I mean, if you look over here in April, the fear and greed index topped out at 69, and then price action became pretty bearish for the next couple of months or so, right? The price just went down. But just be aware that if something like that were to repeat in like 2019, note that the 90 to 100 level did in fact mark the top, unlike what happened in 2021. Now, there's a way that you can clean it up, and that would be to apply like a moving average to it, right? You could apply like a 30-day EMA to this thing, and this might be a little bit more useful because an instantaneous data point isn't always going to tell you necessarily the general, how the market is really moving. Had you waited until this metric reached the 90 to 100 phase, it would have allowed you. It would have occurred a little bit later, close to around 24K back in 2020, as opposed to 15K. So it would have gotten you another 10K up before you necessarily became on alert. And normally, when you break all-time highs, that's when long-term holders become on alert. If you look at like the HODL waves, that's where long-term holders start to sell, is when Bitcoin makes new all-time highs. So then if you look at 2019, you can see that the fear and greed index 30-day EMA topped out at 73. Okay, it topped out at 73 in June. The 30-day EMA of the fear and greed index right now is 64. But we also noted that the instantaneous value of the fear and greed is 73. So, if we stay at these levels, for a little while, that 30-day EMA will start to get up to where it was back in 2019. So looking at it color coded, you can see it looks something like this. 2019, the extreme greed was relatively short lived, and then we went back to extreme fear in Q1 of the halving year, and then a year after that we were in extreme greed. But that time when we went back to extreme greed, we were there for a lot longer. For months before the rally really started to falter, and then we still went back up and put another all-time high, and then we finally came back down. So I think that this is a useful tool, the fear and greed index, and I think it can be useful for understanding where we are in the cycle. How is it extreme fear? Is it extreme greed? Looking at history, it shows you that extreme fear, it's not always the bottom, right? I mean, like in April of 2018, we hit extreme fear, right? And in June of 2018, we hit extreme fear. It's the same way like in Q3 of 2022, we hit extreme fear. And there were a lot of people confident that that was the bottom. But in fact, we rolled over in Q4 just like we did back here in 2018. So I mean, it does show you that just because you go to extreme fear does not mean that the bottom is in. Just like when you go to extreme greed, it doesn't necessarily mean that the top is in. Um, but it does show you where the market is starting to slowly shift, right? It doesn't necessarily mean the top or the bottom is in, but it means that sentiment is starting. It will likely start to shift in the other direction, sometime in the next few months, right? So like, when we hit extreme fear in May of 2022, it certainly did not mean the bottom was in. And in fact, price is only marginally above where it was back then, right? I mean, you can see the price was at right around 36, 37K, in fact, which is where we are today. So if you saw the fear and greed index hit, extreme fear back in May of 2022 and you bought, you would have been dismayed when you watched it drop another 50, 55% or so. So those people, if they bought there, they're only now just getting back into into break even. But anyways, I think it's a useful tool. Make sure you guys check it out. You can find the website. This is what the website looks like. I will link the website in the description below. Thank you guys for tuning in. Subscribe, give the video a thumbs up. Again, check out the sale on Into the Cryptoverse Premium, and I will see you guys next time. Bye.